morning, everyone. A very good introduction. So, my role is very much about looking at how we can get better at what we do. And I thought I'd probably start off by telling you a little bit about the Environment Agency. We were actually formed in 1996, and so we've been around for a little while now, and we are an arm's length body, so we work for the DEFRA family, but we're not actually part of central government in itself. We're an organisation of about 11,000 people, and we've got about £1 billion budget. Now, as opposed to where the MOJ are, actually with the Environment Agency, we've almost got two different areas of work. On the flood side, as no doubt over the last few months you see in the press, actually our flooding budget is increasing. And that's been a trend for the last 2 or 3 years. Whereas on our environment side of the business, actually the money is decreasing, and also from a flood perspective, our revenue budgets are also reducing. So it's a challenging time. We're almost an organisation with two different demands being placed on it. Really, there are 3 elements for the Environment Agency. We do regulations, so we regulate and determine environmental permits, and we will also make sure that big industry and small like waste disposal sites, etc., are regulated. We then look after the flood risk management, where we create and maintain existing assets, also undertake a lot of flooding, modelling of flooding and forecasting river flows, etc., to determine the flood risk. And then thirdly, we have a role in incident management. So that is dealing with incident response to environmental incidents, as well as the main river flooding, which usually are the ones that hit the press. Just to put it into context, we have about 3,000 incidents a day, and those can go from, I'm seeing my oil tank has leaked, to actually the significant floodings and significant like Buncefield incidents. So there's a whole range of incidents that we deal with. Now, it's just a few sort of snapshots of our assets. So for the team that I work with, our role is to appraise and build new assets and undertake major refurbishments of existing assets. We also deal with waterways and water resources assets as well. Now, as you can see here, we've got, probably from a construction perspective, our assets are relatively straightforward. So we build a lot of walls and structures. So civil engineering-wise, they're really straightforward. But what is complex is where we build them. We often build them in literally sometimes in the back of people's gardens. So understanding what those people that are going to be impacted need is really important to us. We're also doing more sort of natural habitat creation, so making space for water, so looking at how we can use the natural environment not only to create habitat but also to create flooding assets. The asset in the far right is actually an asset at Banbury, and that's a passive design. So we aim that will need very little maintenance throughout, so and it will operate with very little input from us. And that's obviously our objective, because we want to reduce, as far as we can, the ongoing revenue aspects of our work. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, we have probably our most famous asset, which is the Thames Barrier, which actually I thought was an exceedingly good photo. So how does it feel to be a BIM client? Well, you know, when things arrive on your desk, like, oh dear, right, what is this all about? So I must admit, when it first sort of landed, I thought, actually, looking at the slide that Terry showed earlier, we were developing our costing, we had a collaborative workspace, we were moving towards some of the key aspects that were already there on our own back. So, you know, it wasn't probably quite as daunting as it could have been. It does provide the technical side to collaborative working. We've been trying to work collaboratively with our supply chain. We have frameworks for the last, since 2000. And that's, it's been quite successful, but we've always had a hindrance in being able to truly work collaboratively, particularly around, the understanding of really what's happening out in the field. Sort of business-wise as well, within the Environment Agency, our Chief Exec said, actually, we are an organisation of data. We collect it, we manage it, and we make decisions on it. So that's the whole of the Environment Agency. When you actually, as Terry said a little bit earlier, this is very much about looking at that data, what you collect, how you're going to use it, and the decisions you need to make on it, but in a more confined environment. So it very much fitted with other aspects that were going on within the Environment Agency. But it also identified how important it is, and perhaps the mistakes that have been made in the past, not thinking about data standards, not thinking about how you structure your data, not thinking about things that you may need to have in place to enable that data to be brought together easily without additional work. And that's a problem that within the Environment Agency we're struggling with ourselves, with our own data, and that we are working towards improving that. I think also the thing that really, that you will see a little bit later is actually it enables us to engage better with our customers. It's very difficult for general members of the public to understand line drawings, to understand what we're going to be building in front of them that they're going to have to live with for 24/7. And thinking about them looking at those options actually does enable us to better engage with our end customers. I thought I'd just quickly cover off how we assess risk at the moment, flood risk. We actually we're an organisation sort of famous really for the way that we ascertain the flood risk. But as you can see here, it's quite two-dimensional. So we're used to doing it, but it is in that sort of two-dimensional way. Here you will see that some examples. We sample and we determine using historic data and running through flood models such as ISIS, really what the impact is going to be on that flow of river. We then produce things like this, where you can see where the orange and red shows where we're going to have the highest flooding impact, and then the lighter blue areas are where we're going to have a lesser flooding aspect. So we're very much used to using this information. But actually, one of the issues that we have even internally is bringing so much data together, having the computer power to be able to run those models. So, the sort of vision of bringing even more data together, really is testing the computer power. So, move on to sort of our early findings. Obviously, a lot of the work that has occurred around BIM is very much around buildings. We're about infrastructure. We do create some buildings, but they are relatively a small quantity of our work. I think sort of the key element, which I think we're going to emphasise today, is we actually generate a lot of our own data that then goes into our projects. So, and actually what we discovered was that we weren't using that even ourselves consistently. So we've got a service that provides and surveys using sort of LiDAR. We have a lot of data already within our own domain, but we weren't actually tapping into it. What we also weren't doing was ensuring that when we generated information from our systems, that we were doing it in a consistent way. So we had a data licensing protocol, but we didn't have anything to say, right, this is the information we're going to get out of these systems, this is the format that we want it out in, so that actually we could transfer that over to our supply chain who are undertaking the appraisal and making sure that we're getting value for money out of that. And we discovered that our supply chain spends somewhere between 10 and 20 days just making sense of the data that we've thrown over the fence. So actually we identified fairly early on, if we can get better at getting our own house in order, we could probably be saving somewhere between £1 million and £1.5 million a year just by thinking about what we need ourselves and getting that consistency. That's a big sum of money for just really thinking things through. The other, I think, sort of key aspect was that we discovered in our sort of early workshops when we were working through the processes, the construction side, everyone was very clear with regards to the roles and responsibilities and who did what. When it came to the appraisal side, and for us, we spend probably on average somewhere between 12 to 18 months actually appraising and looking at the options for a particular scheme. Who did what the roles and responsibilities were a little bit blurred. We had different versions of opinion. So that was something really sort of gave me a heads up that this is an area that we did actually need to improve quite significantly. Our supply chain had various experiences. So it was quite interesting actually. Quite early on, brought our framework directors together, and I went out to our supply chain and said, right, do you want to come along and introduce BIM? What are you doing, etc. All bar one gave me a lead in their IT department. I thought, actually the difference between government-led BIM, where actually the client is understanding what it wants, and it's about that engagement, it's about that collaborative working, it's about how you work. It was still very much seen as an IT solution, and I think over the time, over the last 18 months, that has changed. But I think that was an eye-opener for me, how big the journey actually was. Now, we used our sort of early adopter to prove some of the concepts. So, obviously, as we said, we knew that quite a lot of experience existed in the building. So we wanted to look at what we did ourselves early on and what were some of the challenges that we may foresee as we rolled it out across more projects. So we looked at sort of proving the concept. So looking very much about doing what we do now, but thinking in a BIM environment. So how can we set up that common data environment using the tools that we have, not creating anything new, just doing that. Using the sort of data catalogue and metadata, I think that is a really key area because we often have challenges in our projects where we bring two data sets together, particularly models. Actually, they're giving us different results and we don't understand why. So actually getting that metadata was very important. And then looking at how we could use that sort of 3D modelling going forward. So this was our sort of first common data environment. What was very key here was that we looked at how we could bring in the work from the second and third tier into that common environment. Having people whose responsibility it was to make sure that that data was fitting to the required standards, that we were creating the metadata associated with it, so that it was then fit to be published and move over to the client. This is our first attempt, and it may be perfected as we go along, but I think that is something that is going to be very key to us. So this is our early adopter project. What we did here is we just used all of the data that we already had. So we brought together about 115 data sets. The only different thing that we used was we did use some laser scans to actually get the 3D image. So Woodford is a project that has come out of a strategy. It's the motorway on the left-hand side is the M11. It's in the borough of Redbridge, which is just north of London. So as you can see here, have the river, it floods the houses and the village town of Redbridge. Now, one of our options was to create, which you'll see a little further along, was to create a flood storage area in the centre. Now, for the local residents, the trees were very important to them because actually it protected them from the motorway. So we had to look at options that we would would mean that we wouldn't actually destroy or change any of those trees. So we simulated what actually happened in historic, bringing in the flooding data, so we could see exactly where the impacts were based on historic data. Now, this is an exclusion zone. There's a major gas main running through the site that we wanted to build in. And as you can see, it actually takes up a big chunk of the available land, which obviously, having it displayed like this made us realise the impact, but it also enabled the project team to go out and have discussions with the utilities firm to look at what potential options there may be to overcome some of the exclusion zones. This is the flood storage option. You can see just a flood storage area with pumping stations, which we were actually going to put in the roundabouts, build underneath the roundabouts that exist. This, for me, is something that is new. Our economic assessment, we have to, before we can build, we have to have 8-to-1 economic benefit. Now, I would probably say that our economic benefit is more of an art than a science. And I was really keen to see how we could bring the economics to life, because when you're looking at what can be quite complex schemes, understanding where the economic benefits are going to be brought to that community is really important. So here, obviously the red areas indicate where the greatest benefits are being brought. Now, the big red column is actually a local community centre, which is obviously going to have the greatest benefit. But for me, this is kind of a big step forward, being able to demonstrate really that the economics, so that when people are being able to, particularly local authorities, our own board of directors, being able to see the economic benefits you're bringing to that community is great. I'd like to sort of just move on to some of the challenges, really. We touched on it earlier, but infrastructure, the data formats and the COBE, IFC doesn't really work for infrastructure at the moment, nor does COBE directly, but we are working through that. But I think that's, particularly for infrastructure, that is still a problem to be solved. Unlike buildings, obviously with linear structures, and you don't have necessarily a start and end point, so it is much more difficult to be able to pull that together. We also have variable asset values, so quite jealous of Terry being able to determine a price per metre squared, because actually it's not quite so easy. We can do it for walls to a certain degree, we can do it for embankments for a certain degree, but it's much more difficult to be able to get a unit value. What we have discovered, though, is that we can adapt the generic COBE. So if we take it as being the where and the things, so whereas perhaps for a building it would be looking at the facility, floor, space and zone, if we think facility, region, location and zone, actually we can begin to adapt the COBE format to work for us. And then the other things actually fall out of it, so it enables us to work with that. The software, at the moment, there are still some issues around software, things like compatibility. So the software houses are beginning to upgrade, but at the moment, PAS 1192 Part 3 is just about to be released any day now. So, the standards aren't actually even out there at the moment. Then the ability, we'll be looking for a sort of data service, and I know the MOJ have been looking for data service. Actually, we're struggling to find people that have the capability that we're looking for, so that there's a bit of a gap in the market. Also, availability. We've got limited budgets, particularly on IT spend within the government. There's quite a clamp down. So we've got to think about some of the tools that we may need in-house to be able to manage this, although we are expecting the bulk of that to happen within our supply chain. And ourselves, we are developing the AIMS tool, which actually for us has come at a really good time. Then, so the last couple of slides, looking at the people and capabilities, as I mentioned earlier, people are in different places. People see BIM as being different things, and being able to bring everyone along and get to a good point is going to be a challenge. We're an organisation that is going through change itself, so engaging with people when they're going to potentially be losing their jobs is quite challenging. It is an organisational change for the people that we work with. So our framework providers, it is about them changing their business model and how they deliver their service to us. BIM skills, again, the discrete skills, people are now getting an understanding that they need to be upping the skills. And I think you saw in the brochure today, people now are providing those skills, but it's going to take a little while before everyone is up to the same level. But I think there's lots of opportunities as well. So better information and data management, particularly for our assets. Historically, we have struggled having the information that we need to manage our assets. Our assets hang around for a long time if we've done them well. So, being able to keep that information for 50, 70 years is something that's really key. For us, doing the early optioneering in the same way as Terry described today, being able to reduce that appraisal time from where it is now at about 18 months down to perhaps a period, sort of half of that will bring us a lot of benefit and mean that we can protect people sooner. Stakeholder engagement, being able to use some of the models to go out to local communities, which we've already done, actually does really enable them to understand what they're going to see and hopefully be able to do it before we've invested huge sums of money. It provides that platform to standardise. Very envious of Terry being able to, work, but it takes a little while, and I think some of this, you've got to work through some of the fundamentals to get yourself into a space where you can begin to standardise. Creates that platform for innovation as well, because you can start to think about how you can build and deliver things differently. And I think most importantly, it puts you in the field of being able to think in big data. So for an example, we're building assets out in the wild and wet weather of England. Perhaps in future being able to, as we have our programme, being able to bring in live weather information to understand what the impact of the predicted weather is going to be on our ability to build, will help us, and you begin to think about being able to bring data that historically you would never even have contemplated being able to bring into your decision making. I think it just, creates that foundation to allow you to do that. And then hopefully we've got, is it going to work or not? No, it's not. But just had at the end, just a little slide. But unfortunately, it wasn't going to work for me. Thank you very much.